Welcome to a webcast from Bradmark. Today's topic is auditing and security, and our presenter will be Ed Stangler. Just to mention, upcoming webinars, October 11th, the new 5.2 features, Elasticsearch, and so on. And then November 2nd, practical generative AI assistance with database problems. And if you have any questions, you can email webinars@bradmark.com and expect an answer. So today's webinar program, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining today. Ed Stangler is going to give us an overview, talk about auditing reports, and go further with security alerts, auditing across the database platforms, specifically SAP ASE, SQL Server, Neo4j, MongoDB. And there'll be a brief demo, and then we'll have live Q&A. You can submit your questions, and the moderator will announce them, and we'll get answers for you. Then we'll wrap up, and we'll be on our way. So if I can, I'll turn it over to Ed Stangler to help us out. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. We realize your time is valuable. We're going to talk about a lot of different things with regard to database security auditing, database audit reports and database security alerts. Database security is a really huge topic. It covers all sorts of different areas, from the way you configure things to the way you see data, from data masking to tokenization to permissions and all sorts of different areas. But today we're just going to concentrate on two areas, which is audit reporting and security alerts. And even this is a huge topic. There's just so much to talk about. We can't fit it all into one session, but we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of areas of these two areas, and hopefully cover enough to convince you that you do need auditing if you don't have that already turned on, and then you do need security alerts. I have to say up front, we're on a mission at Bradmark. At Bradmark, we're on a mission to say that every database needs auditing. Of course, there's some exceptions, but for the most part, every database needs auditing, and there's a great value to be had from turning on auditing and producing at least a basic level of audit reports. So, as I mentioned, every business needs database auditing as well. It's a must for every business, because with the regulation and cyber security landscape expanding, it's just a must in order to be able to have a basic level, in order to be able to satisfy all those different types of government oversights that are coming in. As we see in the next couple of years, I think we see that government oversight is going to be increasing on the databases and the companies that use those databases, as well as the attack threat. Of course, you see in the news every day that there's new attack threats coming from domestic and abroad, and they get more and more sophisticated. And databases become a crucial part of that. A lot of databases are exposed to the internet, unfortunately, but even ones that are not are being infiltrated by all sorts of different methods, from phishing to other types of social engineering attacks. They're able to get access to even internal systems. So database auditing at a basic level is needed for every business, just to be able to cover those type of threats and those type of oversights from the government as well. Audit reports in particular help to address compliance regulations, which are covered by a litany of different types of regulations, from SOX to HIPAA, PCI DSS, GDPR, CPRA, the new California one, and as well as a whole other long list of alphabet soup type of regulations. And for each of those, database auditing is one component of helping to satisfy those regulations. Also, there are statistics that indicate, depending on who you're looking at and who you're reading, anywhere between 60 and 75% of data breaches are insider threats. So even though, you have trusted employees, trusted administrators. There's all sorts of ways that those trusted administrators could cause a data breach or to cause a problem in the database, either intentionally or even unintentionally, because with, as I mentioned before, with phishing and social engineering, there can be all sorts of threats that originate inside the company due to those type of attacks. And there's a lot of things going on with a lot of databases are, especially on the relational side, databases are becoming pretty good about separation of duties. But when you have especially no, on the NewSQL side, it's still a challenge in order to be able to see that happen. So auditing even administrator commands is an important aspect of the database auditing situation. Also, with database auditing, you can have quicker intrusion detection to minimize the impact and losses due to those kinds of things. Rather than finding out that, a few weeks later or a few months later, or in some cases, we've seen in recent news years later that you had an intrusion, it's much, much better and much less costly to see that up front, or to see that, much quicker using audit reports, or and also security alerts, a good component to this as well. So being able to, the faster you can find those intrusions, the faster you can minimize the impact, the faster you can do resolution processes in order to fix the damage, to prevent the intrusion occurring again, things like that. So auditing is a crucial component of that. And also, if you want to do analysis of schema mutations. Now, schema mutations are things like, changes to the database, DDL commands, those kinds of things, whether it's due to malevolent reasons, for profit reasons, due to external attack threats, or even just by accident. The audit trail provides you those kind of schema mutations and help you recover from that, or at least, to assess the damage due to those schema mutations for whatever reason that it is. So there's just so many benefits for a business to have database auditing. It's amazing that more businesses don't have database auditing turned on. Certainly, there are some industries like finance and healthcare where there's a lot of auditing already turned on. There's a lot of emphasis on that, but really, every single business could benefit from turning on database auditing across the entire range of databases that they have. Now, every database needs audit reports as well, not just that every business needs it. There's a lot of different types of databases. Now, obviously, some databases are extremely busy or extremely critical, and they would have, just looking at the database causes it to be a significant impact. Sneezing on it or something like that would cause it significant impact. So obviously, for those, it's, you have to be much more careful, and you have to really weigh the benefits. But for most databases we found here at Bradmark, when we work with customers, most databases could really use basic auditing, and they really could handle the basic auditing, because auditing at its core is not a hugely impactful thing to turn on. It's what you turn on in auditing that can be impactful. It's all about volume, really. The volume of auditing messages is really the key factor here. So, it makes sense to turn on the most basic options to get the most value. And then, you can evaluate whether you want to turn on more and what those kind of benefits would be and what kind of ROI you could get from that. So the basics provide significant value toward just great auditing goals. So, for example, logins, which are, even successful logins could be due to intrusions. But logins is probably the one on this list here that's probably, the one that's you have to be a little bit careful with. I mean, obviously, it depends on how your architecture is set up for your database and your apps. If you have an app server that infrequently logs in or logs in up front, then auditing logins is very, very doable and no problem. But if you have something that's logging in all the time and you're getting, thousands of logins per second, for example, then it can be an issue, and you have to evaluate whether that makes sense for you. But certainly bad logins or failed login attempts are definitely something to turn on for auditing. And that's, of course, could be an indication of intrusions, could be an indication of other things too. So even just in general diagnostics, bad logins in the auditing report can be a useful measure. Administrator commands are another basic auditing item to turn on. Administrator commands are hopefully not a frequent occurrence in the database. Hopefully those are relatively rare to happen. There's maintenance commands that can happen more frequently, but then there are other sets of commands that are definitely going to be infrequent. And this could be a reason to audit. This will be for insider threats. So even though you do have trusted employees and trusted administrators, it's becoming more and more important to audit even their commands, because there's no level of trust that can override the potentials for issues from insider attacks due to all sorts of different reasons. And also, at the very basic level, if their particular accounts are compromised, there's no level of trust that can overcome that. And it's important to audit even the administrator commands that are happening on a system. And it used to be where databases, it was very difficult or impossible to audit the administrator commands. Certainly, there are additional layers that have to be put in place in order, in a database level, to figure out, to make sure that the administrators can't actually modify the audit trail. But database vendors have been really great at this, especially on the relational side, but even on the NoSQL side, they've been really great about either creating separation of duties. In the case of some databases, the audit trail, even in the database, is inaccessible to all admins. But a lot of times, the go-to answer for a lot of vendors is just to put it in an operating system file and then use the operating system to have separation of duties. But these days, it is very doable to do auditing on administrator commands from most databases. And then, of course, schema changes are also a very important part of basic auditing. This can be a little bit more, a few more volume, a little bit more volume of audit data, but it's certainly well worth it if you have, especially on high value parts of the schema. There may be different parts of your schema that are different value to you, and certainly you can turn on auditing for just those particular schema items. But this is definitely one of those things where it's an optional item, but more of a desirable thing to turn on if possible. So whereas the first three are definitely the most basic things you want to turn on to get the most value, schema changes is also a great value to turn on even in a basic configuration of auditing. So when you turn on auditing in databases, or if you're doing auditing already, there are some challenges that you need to face when turning on auditing and dealing with it. But I think all of them are very easy, easier to overcome than many companies believe. And we're going to go through a little bit about this, about each of the different steps in these challenges. The very first challenge, of course, is turning on auditing to begin with. That's sometimes a little bit scary, but for some people to do. But I think that's a pretty easy step to do overall. There is a little bit of considerations on that. Configuring auditing is really the part that we find a lot of businesses get hung up on. Even ones that want to do auditing get hung up on configuring the auditing. And I think we can we'll say a few things about how maybe you can get a little bit better ROI on that one, and how to simplify that and really do that in terms of steps. Collecting and historically retaining those audit records is something that, amazingly, we have a product for called Bradmark Surveillance that can help with that. But there's ways that you can do it yourself if you need to as well. And then interpreting and reporting on audit records is another area where it can be difficult on some databases to do. And our product, Bradmark Surveillance, helps a lot in that area as well. And then optionally, alerting on security events is something you can do with the audit data as well as with some non-audit data as well. And we'll cover that a little later on. So the first challenge for database auditing is turning it on. Now, there's two types of auditing that we're going to be talking about here. We have compliance auditing and operational auditing. Compliance auditing is the traditional auditing you're used to talking about. This is usually built into the database. This is something that is for audit reports for auditors. It's for compliance regulations, those kinds of things. Whereas operational auditing is the type of auditing you might turn on to see, you want to see what's being executed in the database, but it's from sources that are not going to be maybe good enough for an actual compliance auditor, for example. So operational auditing may be, for example, seeing every SQL statement that's coming through the database, even if it's executing very quickly. Because with a lot of monitoring tools, you're looking at statements that are executing, but it's polling for that executing data. So it may not catch every single statement, whereas operational auditing would capture every single statement that's coming through. But it's coming, like I said, it's coming from a source that perhaps is not enough for compliance auditing purposes. So when it comes to compliance auditing, this is like the native auditing in the database. a lot of times it will probably require a database restart. And so there is one challenge is to schedule that time during a maintenance time, for example, to turn on auditing. So that is something that's a legitimate concern and is a little bit legitimate challenge for some companies. But again, most databases have maintenance times that are not super busy, and so this is something that you can schedule and is something overcomable. Operational auditing, on the other hand, though, usually can be turned on without a restart. So, for example, in ASE, SAP ASE, you could turn on MDA tables, certain MDA table data. For other databases, you could turn on other types of data. Sometimes the data is already available with the database when you first installed it. Operational auditing is something you can get started on right away, usually with databases. And of course, change management is another challenge to have with turning on auditing. That's according to whatever change management that your company is using, the typical kind of thing for that. The next challenge is typically configuring the auditing. Now, this is the part where we find a lot of businesses get hung up, even when they decide to go full on for auditing. And we found that basic auditing is easy to configure, and it may already be configured for your database, depending on the database. Now, for relational databases, this is typically not turned on, but it's fairly easy to turn on in most of the databases. For some of the NoSQL databases, it's already turned on, or it can be also easily turned on with a comp file change or something like that. Now, with the basic auditing, turning on the auditing itself doesn't cause, usually, I mean, generally speaking, turning on auditing by itself doesn't cause any impact to the databases. If it did, they wouldn't, there'd be certain applications that wouldn't be able to do the auditing that are required to do auditing. So turning on the auditing itself is not usually the problem. It's usually what people turn on after that. A lot of companies we see, they fall into two areas. One area, or two categories, I should say. One category is they turn everything on, or they turn on, because it's the easy option to say, configure all or something like that. And then there's just a ginormous volume of audit data that gets generated, and it's really all about volume. The volume is what really is the most impactful on these systems. And that's one category of businesses we see. The other category is they spend a lot of time trying to figure out upfront what they need to turn on. They want to say, they want to figure out everything they might want to turn on. They want to cover everything at once, and then they get kind of bogged down in that, trying to figure out what they need to turn on and what they don't, and things like that. We find that it's a much better route if you just turn on auditing and get started with the basics, because later you can always add other things that you need onto it. And by turning on just the basics, you get the most value and the best ROI quickly. When you have the basics turned on, you get the bad logins, you get the logins, you get the administrator commands, you get a lot of value up front, and you can turn that on with relatively little volume on there, and minimize the impact of the database, but you get the most value. And it also helps to prove to other people in the company that you need to report to that auditing is feasible on this particular database. Again, the volume of the auditing is the key to whether it's so impactful to the database or not. For most cases, I mean, there are a couple different cases with some other things, especially in the operational auditing area. But when it comes to compliance auditing, especially, volume is the key. So starting out with the basics is a great way to get the most value quickly. Of course, another challenge is change management and when configuring the auditing, and that's the normal thing you'd have as well. Once you've turned on auditing and you're getting at least the basic level of audit records coming out, then the next thing is the challenge is to collect the data and then historically retain that according to your company's retention policy. So the audit data is going to be initially available either in the database or in OS files. Relational databases have come a long way, as I mentioned, to being able to do separation of duties. So sometimes the databases themselves can house the data even for administrator commands. But a lot of times administrator commands still need to go to the OS files in order to be truly secure, where there's at the OS level, they can separate out the duties between the DBA and the security auditors. But getting it out of the database is a challenge. Of course, getting it out of the OS files is a challenge, and then holding on to enough of it for your retention period. Up front, it's good, we find, to figure out up front how much you want to retain, because it's going to be a potentially large volume of data, especially if you turn on additional things beyond the basics. So there's going to be a question about what's your retention period going to be. what's the retention period going to be where you store the data, and then what's your retention period going to be in backups and offline storage that you're going to have the audit data in. So those are two things that are good to kind of know up front. Especially it helps to decide how you're going to structure your storage area. For example, in Bradmark surveillance, we can send data to local files for a certain amount of time, and we can send data to a central database for a certain amount of time. And knowing in that central database, for example, how big of a database are we going to need, how many months of data are we going to need, how many years of data, are we going to have to do some sort of partitioning of the data, are we going to have to do some sort of reduction facility on the data? Those kinds of things are good to figure out at some point as well. Now, we do have a product called Bradmark Surveillance that can collect the audit data either from the database or from the OS system. Sometimes it can be both, but primarily it's usually in one or the other. And we can collect both the compliance auditing and operational auditing. So with compliance auditing, again, we're coming from native auditing items, records that are being generated by the database. And we have operational auditing, which is coming usually from some sort of performance monitoring views. In ASC, it's the MDA tables. In other databases, it's other types of tables. But the key on the operational side is that we're collecting data on everything that's being executed. So it's not just the long running statements, it's also the short running statements. So if it's running for 5 milliseconds, we're still going to be collecting information on that. Now, Bradmark Surveillance collects data in a local storage where we have easy access to it for a certain number of days or weeks, and then we can optionally send that to a central database. And so you can, in the central database, you can have audit records that are retained for, months, years, however you need to do it. And also, once it's in the database, you also have access to the audit records yourself. So, we've done a lot at this point to decode the data in the audit records. We've done a lot to structure it into some manageable way in different tables and things like that. And you can then run your own auditing reports against it directly or use other reporting software against that. Or we can use our reporting software, which generates nice reports in PDF and web versions and things like that against that database as well, with all sorts of filtering criteria as well. So in the different storages, we can also retain those records for a specified period of time. So you can specify the retention period either for the local storage and for the central database, and we have a reduction process that can help manage that particular amount of data. Now, another challenge after you store the data and get the data and store the data is interpreting and reporting on the data. Now, the audit data may be very encoded depending on the database. For example, in SAP ASC, the audit data is incredibly encoded. And so we do a lot of work in surveillance to decode that information. But even in other databases, even in NoSQL databases like in Neo4j, there's a little bit of data you have to kind of parse through and get out and kind of make sense of. Sometimes you even need to annotate the data with other pieces of information in order to make sense of it better. So there's a challenge in decoding the audit data once you have it. Also, if you have audit records stored somewhere, you then need a reporting tool, and the reporting tool really needs to be able to specify criteria. In fact, even I should have mentioned this earlier on the storing of data. In the storing of data, you may need to have criteria for that as well. Depending on the level of audit criteria you can do in the database, you may in the storage may also need to prune it further, depending on how much, depending on the different options available in the databases, because some databases offer better criteria for auditing than others. Sometimes you might need to go a little bit wide and then narrow the scope down in the storage of it. But definitely by the time you get to the reporting tool, you definitely need criteria, because we found that customers have certain databases, when you have multiple databases inside one databases, certain databases, certain schemas, certain users that you might need to exclude from the report in order to be able to generate a reasonable report for areas that you want. Sometimes you collect a lot more data than you need. So specifying criteria is a must in the reporting tool. Being able to query the data and then produce PDFs and web reports are also very important. Producing especially the PDFs, you may need to, depending on your needs, you may need to have this only for in-house use, or you may need to use this for an external auditing firm, in which case they may want the PDFs. And these PDFs, sometimes they'll want it for, it could be a few pages, it could be thousands of pages long, these PDFs. So being able to produce these kind of reports in a reasonable format, being able to handle the links of these PDFs and things like that is an important aspect of any reporting tool you use on auditing. And then also, on the audit reporting tool, it's important to be able to get the queries from the reporting as well, because sometimes external auditors will require the actual queries to be able to double check on it as part of the auditing experience. They'll go through and they'll want to be able to they say, okay, your reporting tool produces a query for this particular report. They want to see the SQL query and then be able to query it themselves to verify that you're actually providing them with the right records, for example, or be able to do for other purposes as well. So being able to get those reporting queries is also an important aspect when you're doing compliance auditing, at least for external auditors. Now, Bradmark Surveillance does all this stuff. It decodes the audit data to provide much better output. For example, an SAP ASC, we do a lot to figure out, there's the event IDs are in there, and you have to convert them to something readable and there's a lot of other things that need to be interpreted. Even in other databases, there's a lot of room for interpretation for a lot of the data that you need to do in order to be able to kind of make it more readable and more usable to the end user. Of course, we can filter by a lot of different criteria in our audit reports, and we can produce web reports and PDFs. And you can also schedule that and do things like to do all sorts of things to manipulate those. And then every query that we do, it can be provided to auditors to reproduce the results and to do the various checks that they do in terms of the queries of the central database, for example, and things like that. The final challenge, which is optional, is about alerting on the security events, and we'll come back to that in a moment. First, we're going to talk about a little bit more on the auditing report side. So, Bradmark Surveillance is our product for monitoring availability and performance. So just generally speaking, I know we have a lot of different metrics that you can keep for a long periods of time, months and years in a central repository database. But we also have fast access to a few weeks worth of data in the local storage that we do. And we provide web reports, daily, hourly, monthly, that kind of stuff, in many areas, ranging from CPU percentages to space usages to like collection activity, that kind of stuff. So in general, we're already an availability and performance tool, and this comes in handy in some of the areas that we're talking about in terms of security as well. But we also do audit reports. We provide great audit reports actually in several areas. Under compliance auditing, we have a general compliance auditing report that you can run just to get everything if you want. You can do all sorts of different criteria, but we also have specialized reports in things like for bad logins or failed login attempts. So that's for intrusions. Schema DDL changes, you can specify all of DDL changes, or you can narrow it down. Administrator commands, so all your trusted administrators, what they're executing, so this will be on SAP AAC, this will be things like SA or SA role. On Oracle, this would be sys, those kinds of things. We also have on some databases, we have reports for queries. So you can see all the different queries, like for example, on Neo4j, we have that. And then we have support for even the smallest audit reports or huge audit reports. So whether you need to generate a few pages of reports or you need to generate 5,000 page audit reports, we're able to do that no problem. And because there are places that you give to a 5,000 page audit report, and they're supposed to review everything. So whatever your needs are for that, we definitely take care of it. And then, of course, we do many filter criteria available in the report generation. So you can filter by all sorts of things, by events that are being generated, to databases, to logins, and those kinds of things. On the operational auditing side, we also provide a lot of support for all the databases, where we can show just from the performance views what's being executed. Often, whether it's executing very quickly or a long running operation. So on the operational auditing, especially, it's nice for some of our customers. They use it for being able to diagnose issues and things like that. So beyond the impact on security threats, it's great also for just general diagnostic issues in a database. Now, the supported databases that we have, for the compliance auditing, we have a subset of what the databases we support. We currently do compliance auditing on SAP ASE, on SQL Server. We do that using we can use either the native auditing built in auditing in SQL Server, or we can do a lightweight version of auditing that we set up through extended events. So we know that some people have experiences with native auditing that are not the greatest. So we offer the lightweight auditing through extended events as well, that provides access to a subset of information, but still most of the information you need for auditing. We also support compliance auditing on Neo4j and on MongoDB, and also recently in Informix we added. So we have compliance auditing for a subset of the databases we support in general, and then operational auditing. Almost every database that we support supports operational auditing, because as time goes on, more and more databases are offering the types of performance views that we need in order to generate that kind of report. And so I'm happy to say we support that on almost every database that we support monitoring. Now, in general, just quickly, our Bradmark surveillance product has web monitoring of performance availability statistics across on-premises, cloud, and containers. We have historical metrics that can go back yesterday or last week and those kinds of things. And so on this, we built the kinds of stuff we do for auditing. We have reports for compliance. As I mentioned, we have auditing reports that can track SQL, bad logins, and much, much more. And we also have in-depth metrics for each of these databases as well that you can correlate with some of the stuff you find in the audit reports. So I just want to highlight on our notable features. We have the web reporting, so that you have web access to all of this auditing information and this security information. We also have the audit reports that we can generate. We have also the product itself has better security compliance than you might have in other products. We all the traffic that we have is encrypted with TLS, and we've done a lot to harden the product for security compliance with like PCI DSS and other types of network scans. So a lot of it has gone into the product to make sure the product itself is also fairly secure, pretty secure on there, and with the encryption and with the hardening as well, whether that's across Windows, Linux, and all the different other types of platforms. And we also have an alerts dashboard which shows the yellow-green status of by server, by database, those kinds of things. And in this is the security alerts, which we'll mention in a moment. So this is an example of the type of compliance report we might generate. This is a compliance report for SAP ASC, but we get similar kinds of information on the relational databases. We have a set of criteria where you can specify all sorts of different ways of filtering the data. And then we have the actual report, which you can see at the bottom starts, and where we have things like, the time, we have the event information, the object information, the login information, lots of different pieces of information, and then it just goes on and on. In fact, we even added some more information after this screenshot was taken. So there's even more information available as well. On this, another page of a report, I want to take your attention to the command text available here. So, for example, you can see that we show this on this particular database. There's an event for command text specifically, but in other databases, the command text may be available in addition to the actual event. But here you can see we provide the command text, and then we have the full text there. In this case, it's an update index command that's going on, and so we have that information in the report. And this can just be pages and pages of reports, whatever is necessary to fulfill the requirements. Here's another type of report. This is a report that's specific to logins and bad logins. You can see we have different things that were audited in terms of some successful logins and then a denied login. So this was a failed login attempt. We have the login, we have the IP address it came from, the username, all that stuff. Great information is available on this particular report for the intrusions, for example. This is a report from Neo4j, so a NoSQL database. And you can see the kinds of things that we see for admin commands. So here we have an admin command that's a drop user command. So this may not be very good for us. We don't know, but we can see who did it and the admin command as well. So on the administrator side, this is the kind of information we provide as well. So now we'll talk a little bit about security alerts. Now, on security alerts, there are really three areas of security alerts that are really the core of it. You have intrusion detection, you have unauthorized access, so people accessing things they're not supposed to be doing, running commands they're not supposed to be running, and denial of service type of events. Now, I have it in a pyramid form here because it's really based on the attack surface. When you have intrusions, it's typically through a listener endpoint, and that's typically much more limited number of places that you need to lock down for intrusion. Whereas then you have unauthorized access, that's a much wider area of attack surface where there's commands, there's objects, there's all sorts of DDL related items and permission related items to deal with. And then denial of service, there are a gazillion ways for for an attacker to bring your database to a screeching halt or to cause problems. So I mean, it's just the widest attack surface possible in denial of service. And it's obviously there's different levels of value to different types of these different items. There's definitely an intrusion is much more of a problem than some denials of service and things like that. So it's but really in terms of attack surface, that's the way this is organized. And intrusion detection is definitely one of the places to start. And then unauthorized access is the next area to concentrate on, with denial of service coming in. I mean, important as well, but definitely third on the list. So a little bit about intrusion detection. So to alert on that, you want to alert on bad logins, failed login attempts. Obviously, that's something we definitely want to alert on for intrusions. But even good logins from bad places or bad people are an important thing to do. So the IP addresses that they're coming from, or the behavior that's occurring with the login are some things to also monitor for the intrusion detection. Now, to do this kind of stuff, you need a monitoring tool or process that can go into the compliance audit data, because that's where you're going to see the failed login attempts typically. Or you can have custom trigger events, but custom trigger events, it's technically it's doable, but it's a little bit more error prone and a little bit more difficult to deal with. It's just a lot of work, and it's the question of how effective it is. But also monitoring sessions is important too for the good logins, because once you do see the good logins come in and they show up in your sessions displays or your connections displays, then you still want to see, okay, where are they coming from? What kind of behavior are they doing? Are they doing weird stuff? That's also important to do in the monitoring of intrusion detection. When it comes to unauthorized access, that's another area. Of course, this is, if administrators are running bad commands. So being able to monitor even your most trusted administrators and see, are they running things they shouldn't be running? Are they doing, drop database or drop table or drop index or things like that? Those are kind of the commands that, or creating users additional access. Those are kinds of things you want to be able to monitor. Even for non-admins, are you looking at DML and DDL? Are they getting or modifying objects that they shouldn't have access to? That's another thing you can alert on. And this gets into also, what's the most valuable areas that you have. There may be certain areas that you want to monitor the DML on, because those are critical, important to for security. Whereas maybe you just want to do DDL for everything, or there's a little bit of figuring out what's the value of the different areas, because of course anything you turn on is going to be impactful at this level. But definitely different things can be done differently depending on your schemas. And then also non-administrators running commands they shouldn't be able to run is another area to monitor or alert on, because you may have, obviously there are database permissions that you're going to be setting up, and those are critically important, but maybe somebody didn't set it up correctly, or maybe something got dropped by accident, some permission restriction or something like that. So being able to still, even after the fact, monitor those non-administrators and what they're running is an important aspect of alerting on unauthorized access. So to do these kinds of things, you need monitoring, of course, against audit data, because what the administrators are doing is probably only going to be in the audit data. If they're, bad actors, for example, they're going to be modifying the stuff in the database, and you won't be able to see their activity. Again, custom trigger events may be something that you might want to do, but again, it's very difficult sometimes to get that right and to maintain that. And then also monitoring, executing commands, queries, objects that have activity on them, those kinds of things, to see if the non-administrators are accessing things that they shouldn't do. This is a kind of a nice to have, to be able to see if your security is still in place, and you can have verifying alerts to see if your security is still in place, for example. Another area, the last area of security alerts, is denial of service. So of course, the ultimate denial of service is bringing the database down through shutdown or stack trace. And in some databases, there are a gazillion ways to stack trace a database. And there's also ways to shut it down, different ways to shut it down. So being able to monitor those kinds of things, the availability of a database. I mean, obviously the most valuable item is to see the availability of the database, which you're probably already doing. And then being able to see, why it came down is also an important aspect of this. There's also database specific availability problems that can be denial of service. For example, in some databases, transaction log full can provide a denial of service. Somebody does a transaction log full and maybe does a drive-by, comes in, fulls it up, takes off. Being able to figure out who did that is an important aspect of the denial of service monitoring. There may be service sessions that come in and hold locks in order to cause a denial of service, or there's all sorts of different ways you can do it that are database specific. And then there's performance degradation denial of service attacks. So if they're flooding the data cache, for example, or too many sessions or things like that, this can be caused by, of course, intentional denial of service, or it can be accidental. But being able to monitor these kinds of things are important as well for denial of service, and that requires monitoring of availability and performance. And that's, for example, that's something that Bradmark surveillance does, and other tools do as well. Now, going back to the auditing challenges, so the final auditing challenge, which is an optional one, alerting on security events, you need an integrated solution to alert on audit data. That means a tool that can, or a process that can take the audit data and then alert on that, in addition to being able to alert on the normal kinds of things that you have in a database like availability and performance, but being able to take the audit data and actually alert on that as well, not just generate reports. That's an important aspect of this if you're going to do this kind of item. And also, a sophisticated monitoring tool is helpful when you need to get the appropriate level of alerts. You don't want to get flooded with spurious alerts, because there are, if you monitor, for example, every single bad login coming in, and somebody tries thousands of times per hour or second or something like that, you don't want to get thousands of alerts. So that's the kind of thing a sophisticated monitoring tool can handle, as well as being able to do other things with data, with some of the data, to make some more intelligent alerts on that. Bradmark surveillance can alert on audit data and other metrics. For example, in terms of the too many bad logins per second or something like that, we can look for windows of events. So if you have, for example, we could say if there are 10 intrusion attempts on a particular login within 30 minutes or something like that, we can send an alert. So those kind of windows of events, being able to throttle the alerts so that you don't see so many, and you just see that there is an event going on, and you don't need to see every single little detail of it. That's the kind of thing that Bradmark surveillance can do. We can also create site-specific criteria. So, for example, if you want to get alert on some of these monitoring items for if schema change, certain schema changes, or commands on certain activity objects or commands, that's the kind of customized alerts that you can create in Bradmark surveillance to be able to handle that kind of monitoring. And of course, then there's just the general availability and performance monitoring that Bradmark surveillance can do for lots of different types of database-specific denial of service events, and a lot of tools can do that as well. We also have historical alerts and an integrated way to get to that historical data through the alerts dashboard. So not only do we have the security alert that comes in, and you can see that on a dashboard, and you can get an email or different messages, things like that. You can go in there and then drill down historically and see what was going on in that particular time, yesterday or last week, and see integrated information through different types of areas like connections and commands and those kinds of things as well. So now that we've talked about auditing in general, just quickly touch on a few specific databases that we do auditing for, and just mention a few things on this. On SAP ASC or Sybase, we find there's there's a couple challenges with this for a lot of people, but we find that it's really not that bad to set up auditing on ASC. A lot of people get hung up on setting up a threshold proc and an archive table. You really don't need that for most cases, but that's definitely a barrier to a lot of people turning on auditing in ASC. But you really don't need to do that. And we'll mention in a moment what else you can do instead. But also, starting in ASC 16 SPO4 on Linux only, unfortunately, you can also target syslog. So syslog is another option in addition to the built-in option where you can store the data in the database. But really, you can turn on auditing without a lot of trouble. And Bradmark surveillance actually uses the auditing tables directly. So without having to set up a threshold proc or an archive table, you just turn on auditing with some certain options, and Bradmark surveillance can easily start going at the auditing data right away and start gathering that. So it doesn't have to be a really difficult process to set it up for most cases. Now, of course, there are some cases where it has to be a certain way, but in most cases, we found that going toward the auditing tables is a great way to get the information. But of course, it's very encoded, incredibly encoded in the in the ASC auditing information. No matter how you set it up, it's incredibly encoded. From event IDs that are available to a lot of different for example, just getting the IP address from the extra data inside the ASC audit data is a challenge. So there's a huge amount of stuff that we do in order to decode that data and make it in a more presentable form on SAP ASC. In general, though, turning on the options for auditing involves the SP audit command, and then there are other commands to set it up as well. To set up ASC auditing, these are the general steps. There may be some specific little things that are not in this list, but generally speaking, it's a pretty simple process of creating the cybersecurity database. And there's some various, things you need to do in there. Not too much, but a little bit. Of course, you need to SP configure turn on auditing in general. You have to add audit tables, and so the way ASC works is they have a set of tables that are done in round robin fashion. And so you add in each of the tables. You configure a particular option called suspend audit when device full. This allows you, by setting it to 0, this allows you to use the tables directly and bypass the threshold proc stuff. So you don't have to do the threshold proc and the archive table and manage all that other stuff. You can just go get to the auditing data that you need. And then SP audit is used to configure the auditing. So here, SP audit is what you would use to turn on the different types of options, what you're going to be monitoring, what you're going to be auditing, that kind of stuff like that. So that's for compliance auditing. For operational auditing, Bradmark surveillance uses MDA tables. So in this case, the tables like MonSys statement, MonSys SQL text, these are the tables that you can turn on. You can turn on the data for at runtime. Typically, we don't use MonSys plant text, I think it's called. There's just too much superfluous data in there to really use it. Just way too much volume. Again, even when it comes to operational data, sometimes volume can be very impactful, and that's the case in the case of plan information. But the statement and the SQL text are coming from MDA. But unfortunately, those tables, even in that case, AC doesn't make it easy for you because they really store like line by line information in there. So there's filtering that needs to be done. There's aggregation that needs to be done in order to be able to say, here are the batches, here are the procedure calls, all those kinds of things. So there's tons of post-processing that needs to be done, even on the MDA table information for operational auditing. So Bradmark surveillance does a lot of that for you and can get that in a nice operational report as well. So going back again to the auditing report that we saw earlier, just to comment a little quickly on a few more things. Here you can see the types of things, the different types of events like select table, built-in functions like object ID being used. Here we have some SPIDs, database login. So a lot of great information on that, as well as on the login logouts. We have the IP addresses and the denied, the SPIDs available as well on the logouts. Those kinds of things are available on the ASC reports. On SQL Server, we support both native auditing and lightweight auditing using extended events. So either way you want to go, we support great audit reports on both ways. The information you get is similar to what we saw in the SAP ASC report. The relational databases generally have the same kinds of information available. So that's really great to have that kind of breadth of information. And then on operational auditing, we use the DM views that are able to see every statement no matter how fast. So on SQL Server, even if you have statements that are running for 5 milliseconds, we can still track that through operational auditing because there are DM views that show that. Now on SQL Server, they don't have a way to show every execution of every statement. So we'll see the statements, but we may not know who executes it or from where and things like that. But we will see every statement. So in some cases, it may be great to see, like, for example, if a delete happens or an insert happens that executed very quickly, but you can't quite catch it any other way, you'll be able to see that through operational auditing on SQL Server. On Neo4j, audit logs are only available in the Enterprise Edition, unfortunately, but it's great when it's on, and it is turned on by default in the default configuration. It depends on your configuration how you started that. But in the default configuration, these logs are turned on, and we get logins, bad logins, and administrator commands from the security log, which is in this location shown here by default. But of course, wherever it is, we can get the information. So from the security log, we get that information, and then we can also we have a queries report that we can run that's based off the query log file as well. Now, of course, there's a lot of challenges with Neo4j. It's a NoSQL database. It's a bit different. There's still, the NoSQL databases are still doing a lot to, in my opinion, catch up to the relational databases in terms of auditing. They're great in a lot of areas, but auditing is one area they're still evolving, and they've done great strides recently. That's for sure in the last couple of years. But some information is still slightly encoded. Getting the IP address, program name from the logs is still a little bit of a challenge. There's rotating log files you have to deal with. So if query.log becomes query.1 or query.2, and so you have to be able to handle that rollover, and that's something that Bradmark surveillance does automatically. There's lack of some information. So some cases we might need to annotate that information from other sources to get a little bit more information. And also in some areas, the failed attempts are not logged into these logs. And of course, failed attempts are an important thing. Like for example, failed logins are logged, but maybe a failed DDL command may not be logged, for example. So there's a couple of things that they need some improvement, but it's really getting to a good point now. And this is, again, going back to one of the compliance reports for Neo4j. You can see we have the ciphertext. Commands are called ciphers, so it's a ciphertext, and we have the event and the login, that kind of stuff. And actually, we also have the IP addresses on the logins as well that was added after this screenshot was made. So we also have additional information than this on there. On MongoDB, briefly, just to mention, MongoDB, a lot of things are in JSON format, or their extension called BSON format. So the commands look like this, generally speaking. They're basically a JSON little document there and the little curly braces, and that's how it's formatted in Mongo. And so even the audit records are in this format as well. So one thing that we do is we parse all that stuff to get the JSON to go in there, and there's a lot of nested information in the JSON log records that we're parsing out in order to get those records. Again, audit logs are only available in the enterprise edition, which is a shame. We really wish it was in the community edition as well. But targets include JSON, BSON, syslog as well, and I think also some other target console and things like that. Configuring in mongo.conf is pretty easy. You can see here an example configuration for JSON, and the place you want to send it to has to be a secure place. You want that to be in order to be able to really audit, the administrator commands and stuff like that. This needs to be in a place that has a separation of duties so that it's secure away from the administrators as well. So that's an important consideration in that. So now, and also I should say the Mongo report is similar to how we have for Neo4j. It's a NoSQL database, and it's those kinds of things. If you want more information on any of this stuff, by the way, if you want sample reports for your database, we can also send you some of that. You can contact us at webinars@bradmark.com. We'll go ahead and go into a brief demo. Just go ahead and share over here. So here we have the Bradmark surveillance product. We'll go ahead and go into. So here we have, for example, a Neo4j instance where we can go in here, and we're just going to run a queries audit report, and we'll run it for the past day. Now, this particular one, we're running against the local store. Due to time constraints, we're not going to show the full-blown criteria version with the criteria, all the criteria on here. But you can see this is a quicker report where we can generate and get a list of all the different queries that we can have the queries coming out to here. And you can see here we generated a report that had 19,000 query items in it. And here we can see all the queries that we're running in the query.log and things like that. And if we generate it, up in the right corner, we have a little PDF button where we can create a PDF out of it. And I'll go ahead and switch over here. You can see the kind of example of a report. In this case, the report is about 2,300 pages long, and it's involving all the different queries. So this is kind of this is a whole day's worth of items and stuff like that. But this is the kind of report that we can generate off of here as well. Now, in terms of the full-blown type of auditing criteria, we can come over here and take a look at a longer term report. So here, this is on SAP ASE. And we have different types of reports. We have specialized reports for fail logins, schema changes, admin activity. But here's on the full-blown compliance report, you can see that lots of different criteria you can specify on this. Everything from command type, DDL, DML, to logins, to event IDs, to databases. Lots of different criteria available to generate the report, and then you can easily generate the report. This one actually would come from our central database where we have months and months of data available, or years worth of data available, and you can easily generate the reports from here and then create PDFs out of them as well. And then we have specialized reports for things like failed login, schema changes, admin activity, and there are other reports as well that you can generate from here as well. In addition to this, we also have operational auditing components where you can see similar kinds of things, but from the operational data from the performance data, for example. So basically, we have support for a lot of different databases, but we're extending our support as well for different auditing, compliance auditing for different databases. We're going to be expanding support shortly for DB2, Postgres, and HANA and IQ. So these will be coming up for compliance auditing. We already support operational auditing on most of these databases as well, but full compliance auditing will be coming soon for that. Also support for syslog targets. A lot of databases we notice are offering syslog capabilities. So currently we generally get the logs from either the database or from the files. We'll be adding support for syslog targets as well for auditing. We also have, in our product already, we have concepts called standard stores and standard rules. They apply to the kinds of historical data that you have or the kinds of alerting that you do. We're extending this to standard reports. So you'll be able to schedule reports, already predefined reports already created, for let's say like the last, week's worth of whatever kind of reports. Those standard reports are something that we're adding to the product across all the different types of things that we do reporting on, but also for auditing. And we're also adding machine learning to draw more conclusions for the audit, from the auditing reports as well, to get a little bit more higher level idea about intrusion and things like that. You can try some of the Bradmark product yourself at this web address. I would try probably next week, because right now we're down for a little bit of redesign, but it should be available next week. And then you could try some of the aspects of the Bradmark surveillance product yourself. And now I think we'll open it up for Q&A.
Well, that's great, Ed. Thank you very much for presenting all that interesting stuff about auditing. And let's see, question-wise, what questions we have. You mentioned supported database platforms. That's not all of the databases that Bradmark supports, but the focus of today's webinar. Question, what about Oracle?
Well, you have operational auditing for Oracle, but compliance auditing is still something that we're adding. We do expect it to come shortly. We just didn't want to announce it on this particular webinar, but we are working on Oracle as well. But definitely, if there are databases that you feel that would be helpful to have our support on, we would love to hear from you on that. And we may already be in the pipeline, because we are expanding this to a great number of databases, as you saw earlier. But also, if there are ones that we're missing, we definitely like to hear about it and try to add support for that. Because for us, we have a lot of the infrastructure already there, and it's just a matter of adding some additional support for auditing.
On the pricing side of things, is it an add-on, or does it come with the 5 version, or is it a separate product? I guess the question.
Auditing is right now built into the product. So if you currently have Bradmark surveillance, you can turn on auditing. It's included. So definitely it's included as part of the basic product right now.
Remind of upcoming webinars one more time: October 11th, Bradmark Surveillance 5.2, and then in November, the 2nd of November, practical generative AI assistance with database problems. So some interesting stuff coming up. And we thank you all very much for joining, and we'll see you next time.